Folks, thanks a lot for the 80,000 subscribers. You guys are awesome. But we're not stopping here. Let's push it, folks, to 100,000 subscribers. So give that support to the channel and subscribe and hit that like button down below to reach our goal of 153 likes. And now let's go for it. When he defeated Clayman at the last Walpurgis, Tempest was officially recognized as a demon lord, becoming part of the Octogram, the demon lords of the 8 stars. After the conference ended, Leon and Valentine left, so Guy organized a dinner for those who remained. With the first bite of the black-haired tiger stew, Tempest is enchanted by the tenderness of the meat with the sauce, so he instructs Raphael to analyze the recipe. Watching Milim devour the food like an ogre, the slime notices that he doesn't need to worry about etiquette rules in that place. Besides the meat, Milim was also drinking as a way to compensate herself after pretending she was manipulated. DeGruel questions whether the girl could have stopped pretending earlier, since Clayman never opened up about who was controlling him, but the Dragonoid didn't want to miss the chance to brawl with Rimuru. However, even though she was the oldest at the table, Milim had her glass confiscated by Tempest, while Guy noticed that this brandy was made from Uranasia grapes. After they started importing fruits from there, stocking up on this beverage is no longer a problem, so the Octogram can enjoy it without restraint. DeGruel comments that Valentine would love this drink, and Tempest reflects that he would have loved to ask her a few things. Next, Raphael finishes memorizing the meat recipes, causing Tempest to collect beloved dishes from around the globe after Walpurgis ended so well. So the boy finally returns to the city of Tempest, and upon arrival, he is startled by the reception of the inhabitants who bow before his presence. Among all, the most enthusiastic was Rigard, who along with Diablo both honored the hero for securing his place in the Octogram. Next, the travelers take some time to relax and enjoy a matcha pudding. When serving the meal, Haruna comments that she's not as good in the kitchen as Princess Shuna, but it'll do. Diablo serves a pudding to Veldora in exchange for the information he got, and with that, Tempest discovers how the dragon knew what was decided at Walpurgis. Caught in the act, Veldora admits that he sold the information in exchange for 3 puddings, and before anyone says he doesn't need to eat, the dragon argues that the point is that he wants to eat. Later, Diablo tells Cheyenne that he completed the mission given by Tempest perfectly, until Tempest himself questions how the demon returned at such an exact time. When he explains that he was solving other problems until Veldora advised him to return, Tempest teaches a lesson to the dragon and confiscates his pudding. Afterward, the slime asks Diablo if Falmouth is so calm that he returns, so the demon explains that his informant is active and taking care of that region as planned. Soon he reveals that he first restored them all to their original form because it was inconvenient to leave them all as pieces of meat. At that time, on the way to Falmouth, Diablo was ranting because of Cheyenne's attitudes, and faced with the inefficiency of healing magic, he had to take drastic measures. In the other carriage, Hume wonders if the 3 on the other side will arrive intact. Back to Diablo, the man thanks for the restoration, while Raisin begs the demon to restore the king before him. Faced with the request, Diablo makes it clear that asking a favor from him can come at a very high price, and Raisin reflects that this is Nor, one of the 7 primordial demons, but the scariest thing is that this devil is working for someone. When Raisin saw a demon lord with hidden power beyond imagination, he realized that Falmouth had awakened a sleeping lion. So Raisin pleads for Diablo to accept him as his servant, as long as he shows mercy to King Edmurus. Diablo accepts the proposal, but warns in advance that he will not tolerate disrespect toward Rimuru Tempest, otherwise all of Falmouth will suffer the consequences. Seeing that Raisin is achieving his wish, the other man kneels before the demon and makes the same proposal, claiming that an archbishop of the Sacred Church of the West can be very useful. Listening attentively, King Edmurus notes that a mage who served the royal family for so long turned his back on Falmouth. Anyway, he supports Raisin's decision and decides to serve Diablo just like the others. Thus, Diablo promises to treat his servants well as long as they behave, although with his unique ability, Temptation, avoiding betrayal is easy. At that moment, Hume asks if the prisoners are still alive, and Diablo asks everyone to relax because taking over a country is a simple process, so soon everyone will be in Falmouth for victory. Arriving there, the subordinates cannot restore the king to his original form, no matter how many spells they try, so they ask Shogo what happened to the royal army. Then Shogo explains that it was actually Raisin, and that to protect the king, he cooperated with a great hero. Raisin then asserts that the battle against the monsters awakened a dragon that was sleeping in this land, and even though that dragon has been destroyed, the concept of this creature still remains, and finally this concept has reborn the winged beast elsewhere in the world. With Veldora's return, all the knights and monsters in that area disappeared, leaving only Raisin, the king, and the archbishop. Then at that moment, Hume enters the room with his companions and claims to have convinced you-know-who. One of the lords, named Carlos, repudiates the entry of commoners into this place, But Raisin says that it was these commoners who saved the survivors of the kingdom. Soon to explain what happened, the third survivor, Archbishop Lyhim, says that there were many casualties in this battle, and this chaos may have been the key to the dragon's resurrection. With Veldora's presence, there was nothing left for allies and enemies but to await death at the hands of the storm dragon. However, Rimuru, the leader of the monsters, stood in front of the winged creature, convincing it to leave the survivors alone. One of the nobles doesn't understand how Rimuru managed to talk to the creature, since having contact with the dense magics of the evil dragon is a death sentence for any living being. But the Archbishop argues that besides being the leader of the monsters, Rimuru is also the ruler of the great forest of Jura. Even the Dryads, the guardians of that forest, serve Rimuru, and it was through them that the King of Monsters managed to negotiate with Veldora. With that said, representatives from Falmouth argue that they don't want to create enmity with a being as powerful as Rimuru, and Yum asserts that he fought alongside him in the battle against the Orc Lords, so he knows that the monster leader's intention is to live in harmony with humans because he's a kinder leader than everyone imagines. Therefore, Lord Carlos appoints Yum as a mediator between Falmouth and the monster leader to convey the kingdom's demands to him. However, Yum urges everyone to calm down, stating that Rimuru is kind but not under these circumstances, considering that Falmouth declared war on his nation. Because of this war, the leader's personal friends were killed, which left him anything but happy. Faced with insolence, Carlos orders the commoner to stick to his role as a mere intermediary, but Diablo begins to emanate his power in response to the human's behavior. To avoid a catastrophe, Raisin pleads with the Lord to calm down, while Yum reminds everyone that Falmouth sent people from all over the world to invade Rimuru's lands without any warning or formal declaration of war. Yum himself, born and raised in Falmouth, was shocked by this news when he was sent to those lands on a mission to negotiate peace, so he had to plead for an agreement to avoid seeing his homeland in ruins. As a result, Lord Carlos loses his temper and shouts that a mere servant has no right to speak on behalf of the kingdom, so Raisin takes the liberty of freezing the man to prevent the tension in the room from escalating further. He then speaks up and confirms Yum's statement. Falmouth was defeated, and all three survivors are present in the throne room, including the king himself, who was transformed after coming into contact with the dragon's magic. The three were imprisoned, but Yum himself recommended that they be released. Falmouth's nobility can hardly believe that their powerful nation was defeated by a horde of monsters, but at this point, they had no choice but to accept the truth and the conditions imposed by their leader, Rimuru. Therefore, Diablo approaches the sovereign of this land, releasing a satisfied laugh, stating that he will now free the king as promised. The guards point their weapons at the man invading his majesty's space, so Diablo introduces himself as Rimuru's loyal steward and administers a medication to the monarch. Sometime later, Admeris begins to fully recover, and he thanks Diablo for his assistance. Then the supposed steward announces that he has a direct message from the Monster King, stating that representatives from both nations will meet in Falmouth in a week to seal a peace between their peoples. With that said, Rimuru grants three options to the humans. The first option is for King Admeris to abdicate the throne and the kingdom to pay compensation, or Falmouth can choose to surrender to the monster nation and become a vassal state. If none of these conditions are chosen, the war will continue. Finally, Diablo announces that a week has been given for the kingdom of Falmouth to respond. The kingdom's representatives complain that it's too little time to gather the nobility from the entire region, but the demon orders everyone to shut up and strictly follow everything that was said, because Falmouth's problems are not of interest to King Rimuru. Therefore, failure to comply with the 7-day deadline will signal to the monsters that the war should continue. Thus, Diablo imposed Rimuru's conditions on the kingdom of Falmouth in this manner, and it's clear that the grotesque display of King Admeris in that state was a crucial piece in convincing the humans of the gravity of the situation. Cheyenne is proud of the accomplishment, but Tempest makes it clear that it wasn't thanks to her. Now, regarding the terms of peace, Diablo adds that he demanded 10,000 star gold coins as reparation, causing Tempest to spit out his drink on the spot. After all, his value is equivalent to 1 trillion yen or $6 billion. Therefore, the boy asks if Diablo went too far, but he argues that there's no problem because among the three options given, only one answer is correct. Analyzing the situation, Diablo argues that continuing the war is impossible because their army was crushed. Secondly, the nobles of that land will never submit to being vassals of another kingdom. Therefore, the only option left is for the king to relinquish the crown and pay compensation, and in the end, everything will go exactly as the demon planned with 10,000 gold coins in his pocket. Tempest questions how he can be so sure, so Diablo argues that star gold coins have such a high value that they are difficult to use, meaning the kingdom will have the value stored in the treasury. In addition to this, the abdication of the king will result in the loss of all his influence, so the nobility will coerce him to assume all responsibility, And since he no longer has his royal knights, the nobles of those lands will easily manipulate King Edmaris. To avoid his death, the king will need to establish an alliance with Yum's faction, which indirectly means an alliance with Rimuru. Finally, the demon concludes by saying that the plan now is to await contact from Raisin and then lend some troops to Yum. Still, Tempest believes that perhaps their next king could form an alliance with neighboring nations, but Diablo points out that Fuse and King Gazel of the neighboring nations are using their influence to pressure the other neighbors, so the chance of this alliance is very low. Either way, if something goes awry, Diablo will take care of everything personally. Meanwhile, Cagalli reveals that her relationship with Clayman has been severed, much to the dismay of the Drunken Clown Alliance. According to the Cursed Lord, he can no longer feel the soul of the man he called his son, and that is the true death. Yuki Kagurazaka attempts to take responsibility for underestimating the Demon Lords, but if we're putting it in those terms, Laplace admits that it was he who suggested everything, so the blame is on him. Tyr responds that it's a relief Laplace is still alive anyway, especially since Valentine is the Demon Lord who clashed with Cagalli, so it's amazing the clown is alive. Laplace argues that on that occasion, it was a night of the new moon, so the powers of the vampires were weakened, meaning it was a stroke of luck. Furthermore, not being as foolish as Clayman can also be considered an advantage, so foolish as to be arrogant and ignore warnings, even though he's weak. With this disdainful remark, Futna becomes irritated and tries to take it out on his companion, but Cagalli interrupts the commotion to remind them that mourning Clayman's death is the same for everyone, and Yuki makes it clear to Laplace that he prefers to take on the role of villain in the story, since whoever pays the piper calls the tune. Soon, Cagalli admits that she doesn't know what happened, but based on Valentine's statements, there is no doubt about Clayman's death. Laplace regrets not getting some answers from the deceased, but the president responds that the Magin being safe is enough. However, the organization lost everything it entrusted to Clayman, such as bases, army, and treasure, and that is a huge loss. In fact, the fortress that was in his hands was destroyed last night after that slime sent followers, thereby using the most intense battle as bait, where the Drunken Clown Alliance was. Still, Yuki believes it's possible to turn things around as long as they reevaluate their strategy if they still want to conquer the world. In light of this, the rest of the group admits that they were all a bit arrogant and underestimated the enemy, and then agree that the way forward is to take a step back and act more patiently from now on. That said, Yuki doesn't intend to give up the war, and since everything Clayman had was taken by that slime, revenge must be ruthless. Tyr reminds them that they just agreed to lay low for now, but that doesn't stop Yuki from setting a trap for the enemy. Meanwhile, in the sacred empire of Riberios, a determined young woman reflects that this nation has achieved true equality by leaving the administration of its affairs to its god, the demon lord Luminous Valentine, the only adversary who has ever defeated her. On that day, the demon offered help when she lost her way, so the girl discovered that Valentine dealt with everything very tolerantly, but still realizes that relying on a demon lord for everything is a big problem. At the end of the day, all the warrior has by her side is her own strength, which she gained by being trained since childhood until she joined the Western Sacred Church. A year after that, she was already a holy knight, and the following year she was appointed captain of her regiment. But as she climbed the ranks of hierarchy, she gradually discovered the true nature of the church, which hit the fact that the Holy Emperor of Riberios was actually a vampire named Louis, who happens to be the older twin brother of the demon lord Roy Valentine. In other words, a vampire declared himself god to rule over humans. Even alone, the young captain had to bear the weight of facing these evil entities alone, and after a bloody battle that almost resulted in her death, she achieved the victory that ended the diabolical twins. After the battle, Valentine decides to show up so that the twins don't die and leave her behind, undermining all the humans' efforts before advising her not to die clinging to these arrogant and useless purposes. With her hands on the captain's face, Valentine understands that the human's intention is to crush what she understands to be evil, but categorically asserts that the understanding of evil by an insignificant girl is worthless, and that playing the heroine in the real world is childish. But as she saw that the young woman defeated her trusted servants, the demon lord gives her a week to overcome the trial of the 7 moons, and after that will be when the two face each other personally. However, after passing the test, the captain was defeated and surrendered to Luminous Valentine. High-ranking vampires like her don't need to kill humans to live. With just a little blood, they feed on the life energy contained within it. And the most evolved vampires live for eternity without even needing that. As far as the young captain knows, the happier the human is, the tastier his blood is, but Valentine prohibits vampires from consuming too much life energy, and this policy was responsible for elevating Riberios to an incomparable degree of order and justice among the nations of the West. To maintain this utopia, the captain of the Holy Knights is responsible for protecting luminous Valentine, who rules the nation from atop a palace built on the highest peak of this land. Upon entering this palace, Captain Hinata Sakaguchi is informed by Louis Valentine that his brother Roy died last night. An intruder invaded the palace and executed Roy as soon as he returned from the Walpurgis. Faced with this tragedy, Hinata reflects that being capable of defeating a demon lord is not a force to be ignored, while Louis warns that his brother's death could shake the faith of the followers. For this reason, Louis mentions that the Great Jura Forest remains stable even with the return of the dragon Veldora, and Hinata remembers that this stability is due to her letting the slime Rimuru escape. The captain had the chance to eliminate the leader of the monsters, and the one responsible for the ruin of the kingdom of Falmouth, but spared the target because his objectives and those of her mistress don't clash on any point. Anyway, Louis emphasizes that angels may intervene if the Jura Federation continues to grow at this rate, and that would be terrible for Luminous' ambition to achieve a total victory in the next Great Tenma War. Ironically, it is possible that the slime's survival could be beneficial because a new threat has emerged in the Great Jura Forest, and this danger should unite all Western nations. With Roy's death, this threat is likely to become the common enemy of these nations. Hinata doesn't know to what extent this prediction might come true, but she's sure that the stability of the Jura Forest is a key point for monsters to coexist with humans. Moreover, that merchant from the east passed information to the captain last night, so maybe he's trying to use Hinata, so it really might have been a good thing to spare Rimuru. Louis reveals that the current strategy is to use that region as a barrier against the east, but it depends on whether Rimuru survives Walpurgis or not, and with the imminent arrival of Luminous, soon they'll know what will happen. Hinata comments that Luminous will be shaken by Roy's death because she's kind, while Louis responds that he can't even feel sad about his younger brother's departure. Sometime later, with the leader's arrival, they announce Roy Valentine's death, and his sister's expression changes upon receiving the news. With her usual coldness, Louise asks about Walpurgis, so the vampire analyzes that this is the essence of what happened last night, and that damn dragon got in her way all the time. Still, this is also Roy's fault, because if he had been around, Luminous could have revived him. Hinata takes responsibility for letting the slime escape, but the vampire reminds her that it was her order. Finally, the demon lord declares that it's not time to cry over spilled milk, because the evil dragon is back with a new demon lord named Rimuru. Facing the threat, Hinata volunteers to face the dragon, but Luminous replies that she wouldn't stand a chance against Veldora after all. He is the embodiment of natural energy with its own consciousness, immune to the swords and spells of men. Moreover, irritating such a powerful being could cause a shockwave in her body that would cause devastation worldwide. That said, Hinata accepts silently, but inside she promises to kill the dragon if necessary. In the end, the captain regrets considering Rimuru a monster and not listening to what he had to say, while wondering if this wasn't part of the Eastern merchant's plan, who might be an informant after all. As for this demon lord named Rimuru, Valentine decides to set him aside for now because fortunately, he hasn't made official contact with the disbelievers. Thinking otherwise, Hinata recalls that the city the monsters are building could accelerate the coming of the angels, but still the Lady of Vampires plans not to clash with Rimuru and the dragon Veldora because that would certainly be more complicated than they can imagine. Hinata argues that enlightenment is the belief where monsters are enemies of humanity, and that city could end up overturning that teaching, so Louis would like to turn the monster leader into an accomplice of Riberio's like a classic evil demon lord. However, Luminous acknowledges that Rimuru seeks peaceful coexistence with humans, so he has already shown that he would never be corrupted to that extent. Therefore, the game now is to observe cautiously and avoid rash actions, besides revealing the truth to the followers about the arrival of the Storm Dragon and trying to establish diplomatic relations with Rimuru without inciting any aggressive reaction. Anyway, it's not like Luminous would stoop to avoid causing a war because Rimuru himself also knows that it's not a good thing to start a conflict against her. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Falmouth, King Edmurus announces that he will accept Tempest's terms and pay the compensation of 10,000 stellar gold coins, but the nobility already shows from the start that they will never allow this to happen. Even with the defeat of the national army, the lords of Falmouth count on the intervention of the Western Holy Church in the face of the presence of the Storm Dragon and hope that Captain Hinata will be personally on duty when this war finally breaks out. Despite the lords' desperate resistance, the king recalls that he has already faced the Storm Dragon once, so he knows that his pride is worthless in this situation. Thus, the only way out is to pay what Rimuru demands and hand over the crown. Otherwise, this will be the end of the entire nation. With this declaration, the nobles become increasingly irritated until a representative reads a letter he received this morning, where the Kingdom of Blumen opposes Falmouth's desire to resist the war. Faced with this, the nobles dismiss the declaration of this tiny nation, but fear that the speech will gain momentum among other neighboring nations, such as the powerful armed nation of Dworgen, led by the dwarf king Gazel, an important trading partner of Falmouth. Moreover, an urgent message from the guild arrives in the kingdom, warning that Rimuru, the ruling monster of the Jura forest, has declared that he will become a demon lord, and that the same Rimuru was responsible for Clayman's death. As if that weren't enough, Carrion and Frey have renounced the title of Demon Lord to serve Milim Nava, and the 8 lords now call themselves the Octogram. With that, King Edmaris makes the men at the table open their eyes to the current reality of Falmouth because their enemy, Rimuru, was able to defeat the feared Clayman. Thus, the sovereign decides once and for all to abdicate the throne and recommend Edward as his successor. The nobility is surprised that Prince Edgar is not the chosen one, but the sovereign reminds them that difficult times are ahead and Edgar is too young to handle such pressure. Meanwhile, Edward pretends to be concerned when nominated, but inside his ego fills with malice. With everything settled, the Kingdom of Falmouth and the Tempest Federation have finally reached an agreement to end hostilities. On the following day, Shuma is thanking Rimuru for the great work with a tight hug, while the slime wants to know where Hakuro is. The princess mentions that he returned to settle unfinished business, while Benamaru adds that he and Jeld were tasked with inspecting Clayman's castle, dividing the spoils and keeping an eye on the prisoners. Benamaru himself left the 3 Beastketeers there so he could return quickly. Hearing this, Rimuru scolds the general and his younger sister for dumping their own work on others' backs, contrary to what he taught them. Raphael tries to contextualize with a lesson scene but ends up using the wrong image and also gets scolded by the slime. Shortly after, the leader comments that Gabaru has returned to the battlefield, so Benamaru explains that he befriended Midre, a subordinate of Milim, and stayed there to help in the conflict. Upon hearing this, Rimuru orders the prisoners to be transported so they won't rebel as soon as Jura Tempest turns their backs. However, the general implies that he put pressure on the prisoners so they won't try anything. As for Gabaru, he should return soon with the 3 Beastketeers. After Milim destroyed the capital of Eurazania, Jura's command decided to let the refugees and prisoners live there in Tempest. Some are part of the demi-human race and wish to learn from the local technology, so the physically strong and Magians will be under Geld's command, working on the lands that once formed Eurazania. As this territory belongs to Milim, she'll be pleased to know that a new capital is being built there. Regarding the Magian prisoners, the general makes it clear that he'll keep an eye on them. Then, Rigger begins to explain the circumstances to everyone, while Rimuru feels inwardly happy to see his subordinates working independently, but also worried about becoming unnecessary. A few days later, Diablo informs Rimuru that negotiations with Falmouth went as planned, with a peace treaty documented along with the first installment of the debt payment, 1,500 Stargold coins, money Diablo believes came from King Edmaris's personal savings. Now that Gnome Knights protect the royal family, the king will do everything to not turn the nobility against him, and nothing like leaving the nobles' money alone to keep them in line. However, as Edmaris was forced to pay the future installments with borrowed money from the nobility, he won't bear the debt for long and war will finally come. Therefore, the king crowned his brother Edward instead of his son Edgar because wartime demands a more experienced leader. The nobles of the kingdom who don't wish to pay the indemnity will blame King Edmaris. After resigning and becoming a viscount, he was sent to a small territory near Count Nettle Miggins. This is where Yume's group is based, so if Edmaris is in danger, you can help quickly. If the new king tries anything against Edmaris, Yume can denounce the dishonor of Falmouth's new leader and spark a revolt. Having said that, Rimuru orders his subordinate to ensure that common citizens suffer as little as possible and allows Diablo to use the first payment from Falmouth to finance this order. Diablo would love to fight personally instead of staying behind the scenes, but the leader prefers the demon not to attract attention and announces that a task force will be organized for this mission. As Diablo understands without complaining, Rimuru jokes that Cheyenne could be like that too, and she feels unfairly treated by the teasing. Remembering now, Diablo mentions that the Western Holy Church has devised a plan to contact Lahim, that old archbishop, demanding explanations about the conflict in Falmouth. Considering the last 3 survivors, Rimuru finds it natural that they are sought to provide information, and since the church was monitoring Veldora, it's not wise to lie to them. Therefore, the leader decides to put a message in an artifact and have Lahim deliver it to the church to see their reaction. At this moment, Gabda arrives to inform that the prisoners and refugees have arrived, and when the leader arrives to accompany, Albus and Sufia thank the slime for receiving their people in his lands, and when he asked about Phobio, they explain that he kept an eye on the prisoners who had not yet left and prevented the rebellion of the Magians, making the slime feel sorry for him. Then he mentions that temporary housing has been completed, and the challenge now is to distribute work for everyone. With the departure of the warriors, Gabiru appears, and the leader praises his stance in the war, but he downplays the feat for having taken a beating from Midre. Rikuta finds it understandable, since that being is very strong and loves to fight like everyone who worships Melim. Speaking of the devil, Gabiru delivers a letter from the girl where she warns that she'll bring people who want to serve her the next time she visits the slime because she wants everyone to learn to cook. Reading the letter, the slime asks if Gabiru knows what it's about, and he explains that he knows vaguely and that he met Hermes, one of those who worship the dragon princess. And according to him, the people who worship the dragon lead a very modest life, and the food they serve Milim isn't cooked or prepared in any way. Therefore, Gabiru thinks he would be seen as a god there by savoring his raw fish. But Rimuru makes him understand that, just as evolution gave the lizardmen a more developed and versatile palate, other beings with a similar palate also seek more developed sources of food. With that in mind, the slime decides to grant Milim's wish and offer a great stay for the friend. Having said that, Gabiru understands the order and leaves. A month after Walpurgis, the city was extremely busy and working at full steam, and apparently the outsiders were perfectly acclimated. Suddenly, Yeld arrives looking shaken by something, so he meets with Rimuru to explain what happened. After organizing the prisoners and sending them to various units, they began cleaning the land, but various conflicts arose. For example, it's easy for superior orcs to communicate through thought, but this doesn't work with the demi-humans and magians. So some magians refuse to follow orders, and even those willing to work show no results. For that reason, Geld admires the leader's ability to unite beings towards a common purpose. Facing this, Rimuru confesses that teaching collective sense to people isn't easy, recalling his days working in the office. The boy asserts that the best thing to do in the face of frustration is to drown it in drink, hence he calls the orc to drown their sorrows. Later at the bar, Geld confides that you can't force everyone to mature at the same speed, and the more people you have to organize, the harder it gets. Trainee adds that sometimes it's even better to do everything alone, while Rimuru tries to calm the orc. Inside, the boy remembers his stressful routine in that office where there were always workers who didn't follow orders, newcomers who covered up their mistakes, and superiors blaming others, so he decides to order another shot of the strongest. The next day, Cheyenne asks if the leader stayed overnight at the bar with Geld, and he argues that the orc doesn't get drunk because of poison nullification. Soon after, Rigard arrives informing that the merchants have started to return after Fuse announced that it was safe, and now there are more merchants than ever. According to Rigard, since Rimuru became a demon lord, no other nation has developed as much as Tempest. In fact, Elmesia El Rusarian, the empress of the Sarian dynasty, declared she would establish diplomatic relations with Tempest. However, Rimuru doesn't seem so enthusiastic about it because he thinks this is a way for neighboring nations to pressure for the construction of the road. As he recalls, the early inspection of the road was done and no hostile monsters were detected along the route. Furthermore, all the communities the route passes through agree with the construction of this road. However, the problem is that the Great Jura Forest borders the Kusha Mountains, and there's a very steep terrain where the Tengus live in a hidden village at the top of the mountains. By nature, the Tengus are a warrior people, so it would be better to contact them to avoid unnecessary conflicts before proceeding with the road construction. Benimaru then volunteers to go because the presence of a demon lord would make the Tengus suspicious. Shuna comments that her brother just wants to show up there to be close to Albus, and Cheyenne tells the leader that even if he loses the general, he will still have her by his side, as Benimaru will surely fall for Albus's scheme and leave this country. The general tries to defend himself and asks if the leader trusts him, so Rimuru makes it clear that he trusts him as his right-hand man, therefore he will be responsible for this mission. After the long conversation, Rimuru stretches to distress a bit from all the problems while planning a new meeting for tomorrow. As the day passes, the monster leader meets with Hakuro, who claims that Geld needs help because he takes work too seriously and seems more concerned than he should with his performance. Putting that aside, Hakuro informs that Distave, the puppet nation that was under Clayman's control, is made up of dark elves who swore loyalty to him. According to these elves, in the place where Distave is located, there once existed an elven kingdom, and the ruins of this lost kingdom can still be found there today, so the Dark Elves call themselves Tomb Guardians. Therefore, Clayman's wealth may originate from the artifacts he unearthed there. With that said, Rimuru asks that this matter be kept secret because he wants to visit these ruins personally before making any decisions. Later, at the meeting of all his subordinates, the slime is celebrated for achieving the title of Demon Lord, and his supporters see this achievement as the dawn of the Rimuru Tempest era. Soon, the leader declares that his domain will be the entire Great Jura Forest, but his advisors believe that claiming all that territory up to the other side of the river may conflict with the Dryads who have influence over that land. If Rimuru publicly declares that area as his property, the implicit resource collection may clash with the need to request permission to explore the land, and this could rile up the nerves of those people who have always been free. After all, according to tradition, those who act on their own within a demon lord's territory are automatically labeled as rebels because the power and influence of an individual with that title are immense and never ignored. Jumping on the topic, Yabiru comments that he informed his father, Aburu, that Rimuru is now a demon lord, so surely the lizardman will come to congratulate the new leader. As he told Shangan, his father insists on greeting Rimuru personally. Hearing this, Rimuru scolds the secretary for not informing him earlier and soon reflects that if the lizardmen insist on greeting the demon lord, surely many other smaller races will do the same. Therefore, he declares that a grand announcement must be made as a way to introduce his city to the whole world, so all the guests would come at once, instead of the leader having to receive half a dozen people every day. Thus, taking into account that the city needs more manpower, Rimuru decides to make this announcement as a campaign to attract new residents, so a grand festival could gather all races, show the city to potential new citizens, and on top of that, he could welcome Milim with a grand celebration. In light of this, all present show enthusiasm for the idea of a festival, and the idea is accepted by all. Hey folks, we're kicking off the new anime season, and if you enjoyed this anime and want to see more of it, go ahead and hit that like button down below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to reach our goal of 70,000 subscribers. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you next time.